In our worship service for today, we are looking at the spiritual gift of compassion. Compassion is one of the most central spiritual gifts. I'm going to start that over again. But it's all good, you know. In our worship service for today, we are looking at the spiritual gift of compassion. Compassion is one of the most central spiritual gifts. Basically, compassion is love in action. You can see this played out in a moment in our gospel reading for today. Jesus is about to be arrested. Everyone is tense and afraid, and one of the disciples strikes and cuts off the ear of the servant of the high priest. But Jesus, in his compassion, reattaches the ear and heals the servant. Jesus is just about to be arrested. He knows that they are eventually going to brutally execute him, but he takes a moment to heal this servant. Jesus realizes that the servant really has nothing to do with his arrest. And why should the servant suffer a lifelong injury when it will not produce any good? So, Jesus heals the guy. Compassion is the ability to see the suffering of another person and, if possible, do something about it. Or at least to feel deeply the pain of the other person. Now, this can be a difficult thing to do. First, it requires you to put aside your own worries and your own issues and your own prejudices. Then, you have to look outside of yourself and see the suffering of the other person. Then, you have to want to help that person as best you can, if you can. True compassion requires all three of these actions. Put aside yourself, look outside of yourself, and feel the needs of the other person with a desire to do something to help them. That is not easy. It takes a lot of emotional energy. It takes a lot of spiritual maturity to try to put the needs of the other person or other people above your own needs, if just for a moment. It takes a lot. So, let's practice compassion just for a little bit. First, I'd like you to practice some compassion towards yourself. Sometimes you may lose patience with your spouse, or your children, or your grandchildren, and you may feel bad about that. But then, in a moment of understanding towards yourself, you may realize that you too are only human. Next, you might practice some compassion toward your neighbor. Maybe they yell at their children more than you think they should. Maybe they let their pets run loose when they should not. And even though these things sometimes irritate you or even concern you, you understand that they are a single person with children, and they're working 2 jobs to try to make ends meet. So, you have compassion towards them. Maybe you offer to buy groceries for them once in a while, or watch the children if they have an emergency. Or you simply feel their challenges and look for an opportunity to help where you can. That does not mean that you don't call children's and youth services if you feel the children are really being abused. And it does not mean that you don't warn them about the dog running loose. But you can actually do these things even while feeling compassion toward the parent and the whole situation. But you can see where having compassion can get you into trouble. You might even get entangled into your neighbor's issues. No one ever said that living the Christian life was going to be easy. Loving and caring for people can be quite a challenge. And then there is compassion towards another country or people far away. Right now, there is a war going on in Ukraine. Civilians are being killed and starved. And you may want to send money through the national aid organizations like Lutheran Disaster Relief. And that is a proper response to your feelings of compassion. But then you may also want to feel some compassion towards the everyday people of Russia. They did not start this war. Their leaders did. And yet all of the nations of the world are going to destroy the Russian economy. Their money is already worthless. Many are losing their jobs as all of the companies that invested there are pulling out. I'm not saying there's anything that you can do about this, but you can feel compassion rather than hate for the people of Russia, even though the government of Russia has made itself a violent enemy of all the peaceful nations of the world. So compassion is not so cut and dry as it might seem. Whether you're trying to be understanding and compassionate toward your sister-in-law or your son-in-law, whether you are a teacher or a nurse trying to be compassionate toward your students or your patients, sometimes it can be a real challenge. And there is such a thing as compassion fatigue, where you just cannot do it after a while. So have mercy on yourself when you reach that limit. But compassion is one of the primary spiritual gifts of God. This love, this understanding flows through you to see the other person, to care for the other person. And it is true that the more that you exercise compassion, the more that you will be able to do it, like exercising a muscle. And this continual practicing of love in this way, this continual flow of God's love through you, will mold you into a more peaceful, more caring, more humble, and understanding, compassionate child of God. In the name of Jesus.